you mentioned some of the trends with, that Water Dogs covering 3 of their 4 games. They would have covered that 4th game against the Archers too if they didn't give up an empty net goal, trying to win the game. Talk to me a little bit about some more of these betting trends.
My favorite one, and if you've been following us on Pro Lacrosse Bets on Twitter, and if you're not and you like sports betting, you definitely should be. The gifts that are my favorite are the ones that the train.
Hop on the train before it's too late.
No, it's not Matt Rambo rolling people over. We're talking about the under train, that in 14 games, and guys, this is like unheard of. You have to look at like maybe the XFL or a league that is constantly going under. 11-3 through these 14 games on the under. If you got turned on to lacrosse because of Big Cat, one of his big things that he says is life is too short to bet the under. Well, if life is too short, then we've had a lot of short lives here in the early PLL season, because the under has been my absolute best friend. And it's gotten close a couple times, but you've also noticed, and I think an interesting kind of way to look at it is when these games first started, you were looking at lines that were around 28. I think we even had a line that was up to 29, 28 and a half.
Yep.
And then now what you're seeing is if it's going over 22 and a half, then you just see people start hammering that under just because of how formulaic that's been. And I'm wondering if you guys have any kind of perspective, because for me, I think one of the big reasons why you're seeing going under isn't because anything that has to do with the players or their level of skill. I think a huge factor is the fact that they are playing in the altitude in Utah, because if you actually do a comparison, you look at the Utah Jazz, they typically are a very good team at home, and that's for one reason and one reason only. When you're getting teams on back-to-backs where they have to go to that altitude and play, that is, I think, why I get that the lines were high, but I also think a lot of those unders were happening because these guys are still acclimating, and I think that is why as we head into the playoffs, now you might look at that number and say, let's play blind unders 11-3. Now that the market has adjusted and you're seeing lower lines coming out for these totals, and you're also seeing these guys now getting acclimated to this kind of style of play, to the altitude there in Utah, I would actually start being cautious and playing overs, because these 3 overs that we've seen have been in the last few days of games. So I think there's a lot to that, and I get that part of that's the market adjusting, but I also think that's these players' bodies adjusting. But you can't talk trends without talking about that under trend, because that is just unreal. I mean, 11-3.
It really is.
Keep that train rolling, baby.
No, it is. And I think you brought up a good point about the altitude and the fact that they're playing on short rest. The heat has definitely been a factor. And now an important thing to know too is they're going to have at least a day in between games. The Whipsnakes get, rest all the way until the Thursday. But these teams, they have rest. Some of them have multiple days rest going into going into Tuesday's game. And then they're going to get another day of rest if they win that one. So I do think, the fact that, you had a team that might have had to play a 9:30 game one day and then go and play a 7 game the next day, that was rare, but it still happened. I mean, that's definitely going to take a toll. And I think a lot of teams saw last year how big transition was for these teams. A team like the Chaos, who has really struggled, thrived in transition. I think a lot of teams really played that well this year. And I think that was what they went to take away. They said, let's get our personnel out there. Let's limit. Let's, as Joe Keegan likes to say, punt on 4th down, where, if the shot clock's winding down, let's get it to a corner, get our personnel on, and limit these transition opportunities. And I think that's why you've seen the scoring go down a little bit, because obviously these defenses are talented enough to stop, shots when playing 6-on-6. And, even if you look at teams like the Redwoods that have somehow been able to, thrive off the 2-point shot, you limit those and it's even lower. So, I definitely agree with you on the altitude and the heat. And I think also it's a mix of these coaches just, making decisions on, hey, we're not going to get beat in transition. We're going to try to let them beat us in 6-on-6, and making sure that they slow the game down a little bit. It's still a fast game. You still have a 52-second shot clock, but I think that's kind of played a part in it as well. Adam, how about you? Do you have any thoughts on, how this, has been going? And what about, how the market's kind of adjusted, as we said, whereas we were used to getting lines that were in the 28, 29, and now it's like it doesn't seem like anything gets over 21.5 or 22.5.
Yeah, absolutely. I was, to be honest with you, I think we've talked on previous Just Pro Lacrosse Talk pods how surprised I was at those lines coming into the series, especially when you look at, I know it's obviously a sprint of a season this year in comparison to PLL year 1, but you saw single-digit games last year going on the over in terms of when you look at scoring in last year's games compared to the lines that were being put out this year. So hammering that under, I know Big Cat loves that over, but like you said, Dan, it was the smart bet from day one to bet the under. So I do agree, though. I think going forward, these are going to be high scoring affairs, and potentially hitting the over is going to be a smart play. So it was interesting to see how the Vegas really looked at these numbers, because they didn't have much data to go off of. And then that data they're going off of is completely different. The variances are so different from a sprint of a championship series comparative to a summer long season.